Hey everybody, welcome to the CRE Showcase series. Are you looking to buy, sell a business? This is the process explained. We're featuring Steve Merritt and he will tell us all about it from Transworld Business Advisors. Introductions, a little bit about myself. I've been in commercial real estate about 6 years. I do industrial, retail, office, land development, and biotech sectors. So basically, if you need any help with leasing, buying, or selling, give me a call. All right, on to Steve. Steve, introduce yourself, please.
Good morning, Mary Jane. Steve Merritt. I'm the president and managing partner here at Transworld Business Advisors in Houston. Transworld is a network of, I think now over 1,200 brokers worldwide. We have over 300 offices throughout the world as well. Here in the Houston area, we have about 46 brokers. We represent a big swath of the state. In our office, I have four managing partners alongside myself, and we have a team, much like you probably do as well, Mary Jane, that all of our brokers can work through to assist in getting our transaction flow uh, done. So uh, today we wanted to talk a little bit about why selling a business or buying a business is a little bit different than, say, just buying real estate. Certainly every bit and piece has a complexity that's unique to that particular transaction, but complexity is probably the biggest reason that we talk about the differentiator between selling a car, or selling real estate. Oftentimes I'll have folks say, "Hey, isn't this just like selling real estate, right? Selling a house." And Mary Jane, you know yourself because you guys are a part of a startup and you've been involved in business transactions before, that there are a lot of nuances involved in selling a business and buying a business. And so what most people think is a key consideration in selling or buying is the price. Like they think that's the most important thing. While it is important, it's actually probably the least important. It's probably the least complicated facet of selling a business. And so we'll talk a little bit about here in a bit about the other considerations, the other things that you had to keep your eye on when you're thinking. So
Yes.
complexity, risk, cash flow, confidentiality, like extremely important, right? Some of the first things that we manage the conversation around our confidentiality. It is one of the most important aspects of what we do. Like selling a house, right? There's very little confidentiality. And in fact, you don't want confidentiality. You want everybody to know you're selling your house when it's time to sell your house. You own a business, you think about your key customers, your employees, your competitors. What would be the worst thing that could happen is they find out early in the process that you're selling, right? Well, the reality is that life without the current owner of that business is going to be just fine, right? But they don't know that, right? They think about, I heard somebody else in another podcast I was listening to, he says they think the movies, right? They think that there's going to be this big, huge come in with the new, out with the old, right? Well, that's not really a thing, right? In actuality, buyers want the employees, they want your customers, and they want your vendors, right? They want all that transition to occur. And if you let that cat out of the bag early on, well, you risk the integrity of the transaction, and you risk the business, right? Businesses have, I don't know that they've necessarily failed. I'm sure there's some stories out there where they've had issues where they have because of confidentiality issues. But our whole transaction environment around a deal, as we call it, selling a business, is built around confidentiality. So the other aspect of this is qualifying a buyer, right? So that's a key element of what we do, right? This is a very interesting stat, right? And I probably need to get it updated, but it's probably not too far out. But buyer qualification. So I think it's somewhere around 2 out of every 10 buyers are real buyers. So said another way, only 20% of buyers looking at businesses are real buyers. They're just tire kickers. They're window watchers. They want to look at a deal. They want to see information. They're dreaming rather than actually a real buyer. And so our job as business brokers are to vet through those folks and find those real buyers. And so finding a real buyer has a lot to do with just having a conversation with folks, talking to them. I can't tell you how many times people have called me and said, "You answered your phone, right? You responded back." We're all really busy, but if you don't pick up the phone and have a conversation with somebody, then you're missing out and you're not really seeing who is on the other side of the deal. So we'll talk a little bit about seller journey and we'll talk about the buyer journey, right? So on the seller journey side, you know, much of this, what we like to say, like we'll have a lot of folks come to us, Mary Jane, that will say, "I want to sell and I want to sell now," right? Well, that's fine, right? And we certainly can accommodate that. And I would say the vast majority of our clients are in that category, right? But who is the best seller out there? Who's the best company to sell in my view would be those companies that have been preparing for years. Those companies that have come to me and met with me years ago, a year or two, not necessarily years, but a year, long enough to make some changes in the business so that you can build financial clarity around your business. The vast majority of business owners do what we call live out of their business, meaning they take their vacations out of their business and they run their car expenses, their personal car expenses, their mother-in-law expenses, everything, build a pull through their company, right? So that's not financial clarity, right? That builds a lot of grayness in the transaction, right? So what you want to do now, well, I'm not saying you can't go have dinner with the family and charge it to your business, right? But make sure that that's identifiable. Make sure you don't bury that into cost of goods sold, and so it's hard to find because it becomes a situation where it builds doubt in a business, right? So you don't want that. You don't want doubt to creep into a deal when somebody's just trying to review your financial statements, right? So a classic example is, hey, I'm losing $10,000 a year, but in reality, I'm making $100,000 a year. And so made up of all those items are, I pay my mother-in-law who doesn't work in the business $25,000 a year. I have my parents who are in their nursing home. I pay for those expenses, right? And on, right? The bill to that 100,000, that is not financial clarity. So the other aspect is operational independence, right? What does that mean? So how much does that business rely on the owner to survive, right? So if the owner is that what everybody hears is a chief cook and bottle washer, right? That if they walk away from the business, then the food doesn't get cooked and the bottles don't get washed and the plates don't get cleaned because they're absent from the business, right? That is lack of operational independence. So building financial clarity, operational independence is something that you don't start on today to sell your business tomorrow. Literally, it's something that you start on it, years before to sell your business years ahead, right? Everybody should have a plan of action to sell their business at some point in time. So an exit plan. So that's key to most folks. Like many folks surprisingly don't have an exit plan. They haven't really thought about when they enter a business to have an exit plan. So every business owner is what I'm saying should have an exit plan. So the other aspect of the seller's journey is the valuation. What is their business worth, right? I have heard so many times from people that, I meet with them initially and they say, well, my friend's business around the corner sold for 5 times revenue. Well, did they really, right? Chances are they did not, right? I don't want to say they were telling a mistruth, but the reality of the situation is businesses sell for a multiple of their cash flow. We talked about cash flow a little bit earlier, right? How that's important, right? And so valuing a business is not listening to your neighbor. It's not necessarily reading up on the internet of what has sold, because you know what? These are private transactions, right? Very few people can find access to what, this biotech company, as an example, that like Mary Jane has, what they have sold for in the past, right? And so beyond that, valuation clarity is part of understanding all the nuances in that business. What does your customer concentration look like? What does your reliance on the owner look like? All those things build into the valuation of a business, and where you are in the market, and that relative positioning. So the other aspect of selling businesses is built around marketing the business, right? And I talked about confidentiality before, and how important that is, and how important it is that your employees don't find out, that your key competitors don't find out as well, right? Because the thing that they would love to tell the story about is how you're selling, and use that against you, right? So keep it confidential. I often tell my clients, don't even tell your sister-in-law or your brother-in-law or your best friend, right? Keep this to yourself, right? Keep this between you and I. Certainly tell your wife, right? Because that could be a big problem if you didn't tell your wife you're selling the business, right? Um, but when we do our outreach and our screening process, it's all built around confidentiality. No buyer gets to see any business that we represent without first signing a confidentiality agreement. It basically says that they keep the information between the two of us, right? And they don't share it with anyone else. That process is embedded all the way through our process. And what I would say about that, even to the point that a buyer signs a confidentiality agreement with us, they don't really get to know about that business until they've talked to us, right? They need to have a conversation with us. Now they'll see, hey, this is a business that we're selling that is located in the Houston area or one of our other territories, for example, in West Texas, that we sell and represent clients in. And it'll give you a general description of the business. You'll see some financial statements, but you won't see the name of that business, right? There'll be, 20 or 30 other similar businesses in the area, so nearly impossible for you to quite ascertain who that business is. So it's very important that we keep that level of confidentiality intact throughout the process. And we talk a little bit about the screening process, right? We talked about before how literally only 2 out of every 10 buyers are real buyers, right? So the only way to really determine that is to talk to them, right? To get a feel for who they are. Um, and and so marketing through the process, confidentiality, very important. I think, you know, Mary Jane, in your process, probably confidentiality is not a key component in terms of knowing where the property is, right? It's important that they know where the property is. So a little different in that respect. And that's why we partner so often times with commercial real estate folks, because this is what we're best at, right? We don't sell commercial real estate on its own, right? That's not what we do. We sell businesses. And so the other bit, negotiation and diligence leading into closing, right? So we're involved in that whole process, and from the very beginning to the very end. There's no part of that process that the agent, the business advisor, is not involved in. Um, the more communication you have, the better on that. It's not about hiding the ball, so to speak, right? This is about bringing out the financial clarity that we talked about before, and bringing it out early and often. And it affects the negotiation. It affects the diligence process all the way through closing. We talk to our clients, our sellers, about continuing to run their business while they're selling as well, right? This is not a process when you start selling your business, it's time to go on vacation. It's time to think about running that business like you've never run it before, right? I always tell my clients, always run your business when you're trying to sell like you're never going to sell, right? Because there are that potentiality. There's that potential. I don't think there's such a word as potentiality, is there? There is that potential that you don't sell, right? And the last thing you want to do is run that business down, because you haven't paid attention to it through that process, and then have to deal with that aspect of it. So the other part, the back end of a part that a lot of people forget about is transition planning for business continuity. So what does that mean? That means that, who's going to pay the bills afterwards, right? Who's going to transition to the new owner as far as the knowledge base, right? Little things from the utility bills and to the customer transitioning. Those are all conversations that have to continue after the close, right? Not during the closing process because the business hasn't been sold yet, right? Um, any thoughts or questions around that, Mary Jane?
Yeah. So, have you ever had an employee or employees find out about a sale before it's sold, and what happened?
Yeah. So, in spite of best efforts where we've said, hey, let's keep this confidential, it there's this urge by business owners to tell that key employee that they've worked with and say, hey, I'm going to share with you, but keep it to yourself, right? And there are times when that it's worked out okay, right? But there are anecdotal stories that I've heard where that key employee holds the deal hostage at the end and says, I'm not sticking around unless you pay me, right? Literally, it's bribery, right? I want to get paid as a result of me staying on board, right? And these are real stories where the deal hasn't closed as a result of it. We've had a situation where a seller well, really a buyer said, I really need to interview this employee. And so sometimes that's important. Sometimes you can't get around that. But the key is it needs to be managed very closely. It needs to be managed at the end of a transaction, not at the beginning of a transaction. And you need to have everything else out of the way, right? But in this particular case, it was a employee that wasn't really an employee. They were a consultant. And so they didn't really have a contractual W-2 type relationship with that business. And so through that process, the buyer found out about that and said, well, I'm not really comfortable that there's a lot of continuity because that person could just go work for my competition or go over here. And so those are important to get those out. And so I've sort of jumped to the clarity, jumped around a little bit at, but the important things on items like that we really feel are important is to get those things out up front. If there are those key employees that have a different relationship with the business, that you describe those and disclose those up front, right? We want to get all the, don't necessarily want to call it dirty laundry, right? But you don't want to have a situation where you get deep into a transaction and you find out that there is a lawsuit that hasn't been disclosed, right? You're about to close tomorrow and suddenly you find out there's a lawsuit, right? Well, we want to get that out at the very beginning. It shows integrity. It shows that you're not afraid of that, right? And we can deal with it if it's disclosed early on versus if it's a last minute thing, it creates jitters in the deal. So that's part of our job is educate our client on communicating those things. Certainly tell us, right, and let us help you determine whether or not that's something that should be disclosed. But if you don't tell us, then we can't help you. It's much like that attorney-client relationship. Tell them everything, right? We owe you that honesty and integrity and confidentiality, right? We're not going to tell anybody else, but we can't protect you if you don't tell us.
And then I had another question about the marketing. So, if these are so like hush hush, right? How are you getting the marketing out to the people who need to see them?
It's a multitude of methods, Mary Jane. So much like there's an MLS for multiple listing service for real estate, right? We have that similarly for businesses, right? And oftentimes you can see that there's some out there that aren't confidentially managed, right? Oftentimes those are business owners trying to sell their business themselves. But it's Transworld is the largest business brokerage company in the world. We sold $1.3 billion in deals last year in businesses. And so our market and our website, and you can go and Google me and put Transworld Steve Merritt, and you'll see all my listings that are all on Transworld. But there are, 20 or 30 other MLS, if you will, websites that have our businesses on them. And the confidentiality varies, right? Sometimes you will see a bit of information, but I would say probably 90% of the time you're not going to know who that business is because it's going to be described in a very in a more generic fashion rather than putting the name of a business on it. And sometimes you can glean what that business might be, but it's never going to quite drill into the details of it. Does that help?
Yeah, thank you.
Yeah, absolutely.
All right.
So transition planning was the last bit on the seller journey through the process that we'll highlight. A lot more to it than that, but those are the highlight key points around that. So the buyer journey, right? So we do some buyer representation work, meaning a buyer comes in and says, I want this kind of business. Can you go search for that for me and represent me through the process? And certainly we'll do that. But the vast majority of what Transworld is involved in are the seller representation, meaning we represent sellers through the transaction. But we also work with buyers, right? It's very important to us that a buyer is felt goes through a process and feels like they are they're given the information that they need in order to make a decision that helps them through the process. And so, you know, I'll get in a little bit about the capital structure here in a little bit, but so, you know, when I have a business for sale, I'll get a ton of inquiries into that business, right? So first step, have them sign a non-disclosure agreement. Second step is pick up the phone call and talk to them, right? Why are you interested in this business, right? Uh, and so what you'll get a lot is, well, I really like the cash flow. I like, and that's about all. I don't know anything about the business, but I want cash flow. I want a business that makes $1 million a year in cash flow. Well, that's not necessarily a good reason, right? I mean, how do you fit into that business? What's your business acumen to begin with? Uh, you know, One of the most traded businesses in the United States is the restaurant industry. And that's one of the most difficult businesses to get into, right? You have to really be knowledgeable about almost every aspect of the different types of business. You think about restaurant industry, there's inventory, there's spoilage issues, there are employee issues, there are landlord issues, there are all these challenges that not every business has to deal with, right? A lot of other businesses have similar challenges, but they'll say, hey, this is the American dream. I want to start my own, not start my, but I want to buy into a business that's already been built that's a fine dining established as an example, right? And so we want to hear that story a bit more, right? Because at the end of the day, they may want that, but unless they've got cash to come in and buy that business out, there's not many banks that are going to stand behind a buyer that really doesn't have the acumen to be successful in that business, right? So we want to know that story, right? Because if we take somebody down the journey of looking into a business and they're really not qualified and they shouldn't buy that business, then we've wasted their time, our sellers' time, and our time as well. And so everybody also has a different risk tolerance, right? Like, so on one extreme might be like oil and gas industry, right? Well, that's not made for everybody, right? Because it's a high risk area. It's up and down all the time with the economy and such. But it has a lot of highs, very profitable years where they do really well, but it's got a lot of lows in it. And so you got to be able to have a balance sheet, to be able to support a business that's like that versus say like an online business, like super boring business. But you know what? It it takes a lot. It has a lot less risk elements to it than say the oil and gas business, right? So you get an understanding of the person and what they're all about to gauge kind of where their right fit is. And we have numerous times, like I mentioned before, you got to talk to people, right? Hear their story. And I'm selling a business with one of our brokers here. She brought a buyer to me, and that's what we do. We do what we call co-broke. So we all of our agents understand all the deals that we have, and they bring buyers to a deal to help us more successfully sell our businesses. And she was talking to this guy, and he wanted a particular type of business, and we just really didn't have anything that fit that. But then when she listened to his story, she said, "I have the perfect business for you." And it was a pool service and construction company, and 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 so had she not listened and heard the story about what he had to say, she would have never connected the dots and said, "I've got the perfect business for you." So we're closing on that deal later this week. Um, and so understanding risk tolerance and understanding what your buyer's looking for. Uh, Evaluate the opportunities beyond the financial statements. Like the first thing that people do when they look at we call it SIM, it's confidential information memorandum. It's basically the marketing deck about this business. The first thing they do is they go to the financial statements, right? But beyond that, really, the one of the most important considerations is they should think about opportunity, right? Buyers will buy a business because of the opportunity. They're going to pay you for the financial statements, right? So what has the business achieved is what you'll get paid for as a seller, right? But they're going to buy it because this business has opportunities. So we as brokers will start thinking about those things. What could elevate this business to the next level? And we don't want to just hope that the buyer figures it out, but we want to coach them in that regard. As an example, we talked a little bit about on the seller side where that business relies entirely on the owner, that owner's the chief cook and bottle washer. Where, well, in this particular case, let's say they're the main salesperson behind that business, right? And they're the only salesperson behind that business. Well, spin that a little bit differently from a buyer perspective. There's an opportunity to bring in a sales team and leverage this business in a much different fashion than what that owner has done in the past, meaning add 2 or 3 salespeople and you can multiply the sales beyond what they were able to achieve. So evaluating opportunities beyond the financial statements is a really key element of what you can think about. Like other things would be growing into another geographical area, adding a different sales SKU to the business than what they already had, things that really just weren't thought of during the previous ownership, right? Um, and then so we talked just a bit ago about capital structure, right, and financing. One of the things that makes some buyers not uh, real buyers, right, is they have no financial capabilities, right? Uh, One of the last things I want to hear when people call me is, "Hey, I want to buy this business, and I'm going to talk to my mother-in-law or my father-in-law about funding it," right? Well, that's a possibility, right? But when that buyer is putting their risk, and meaning they're putting their dollars behind the transaction, then you've got a more serious buyer in the deal, right? And so one of our key jobs is to make sure that that buyer really has the money to buy the deal. Like Mary Jane, in your deals, like, you have a little element of that as well. You don't want a buyer that you're taking around showing all these property to that has no ability to close on a deal. So you go and get them pre-qualified with the bank, right? So that proves that out. We do a little bit of that too. We'll, one of the very first things we'll do is we'll pre-qualify our business with one of our partner banks. Like the vast majority of our deals, our businesses have SBA financing behind it. Well, that's not the case on commercial real estate, right? Commercial real estate doesn't oftentimes alone in and of itself qualify for an SBA loan. So SBA loans are Small Business Administration loans. It's federal government backed. The loans aren't actually coming from the federal government. They're coming from your lenders, but they're backed by uh, the government. And it's designed to to create growth in our economy. And that's the reason why we have those. So we have these partner banks that specialize in different type of financing. Like some of them love the pet industry, and some of them love healthcare. And so we partner ourselves with various SBA lenders that we know will close on particular type of deals that we have. And so we'll introduce our buyers to those banks as well, and those banks will vet them and make sure we've checked that box, that we've moved forward with somebody that's capable of buying that business. So one of the worst things you could have is you get through the whole process, spend all this time, and you get to the end and you can't qualify, right? Certainly has happened, I'm sure, in the past. So closing and integration, I would say, this isn't a at the end bit. It's a all the way through process. It's starting and staying involved on an ongoing basis. And it's everybody. This is an everybody thing. This is a buyer thing. This is a seller thing. This is a business advisor thing. That's a me thing. That's an attorney thing. That's a your key accountant thing. So I would say whether you're on the buy side or the sell side of a deal, make sure you've surrounded yourself with solid team members that help you get to the end. Very, very important there.
If someone's looking to buy, should they contact you or someone like you to see what they should start doing first?
Absolutely. We are constantly contacted by buyers asking, for, hey, here's what I'm looking for. Where should I go? Right. And the key business advisor will ask them deeper questions. Okay, tell me a little bit more about yourself, right? And in order to help steer them, we'll have meetings here in my office where we have, I think, 350 listings and I think close to $300 million in businesses that we represent. And it's an overwhelming process oftentimes for them to find, where do I go? What do I look at? What size deal is best for me? And we've seen this 1,000 times, so oftentimes we can help navigate them quickly through that initial vetting process. And so we'll sit with them and we'll do kind of a question and answer session, and then we'll do a high level viewing of here's what we have, and we'll start at an industry level as an example. So we'll look at what industries do you not like or what industries do you want. Usually it's sometimes easier just to say, what do you not like? And we'll uncheck those boxes, right? We'll filter those out. And then we'll talk a little bit about, well, what's your capability to buy? What are you thinking? Well, I want the $1 million business. Okay, well, let's hang on a minute. Do you have, $3-4 million in cash or financing capability to buy that business, right? You don't need cash, but you need at least probably 10% to think about buying a business. Uh, well, they don't have that, then we need to change that and filter it down to a smaller size business, right? Because everybody wants $1 million plus a year in cash flow business, right? But not everybody can afford that and or manage that. And then the next step after we've gone industry, the size of the business, then we start digging into some of those other things we talk about, those different nuances about, is it a singularly run business by the owner, right? Or are you looking for something that is one that has everything in place already and you can operate it as a CEO, or one where you are running the business in the day-to-day operations, those owner operated businesses? Which is it? What best fits you? One of the common things that people tell us, Mary Jane, is they say, I want an absentee business. There is really no real absentee business, right? If you buy a business and you run it absentee, then you're probably your bank account is going to be absent cash flow, because that's the direction it's going to go. The more involved you are as a business owner, the better your business does. And that's across any business, even from like when we get the coin operated uh, laundry mats, right? Those ones you go stick they still have the coins, some of them, believe it or not. A lot of them are into the cards, but everybody wants those, right? But those are not truly absentee. Those are probably as close as you can get to absentee. The storage facilities are as close as you can get, but you still have to manage it. You still have to keep an eye on it, or somebody's going to take you, right? Um, that answered that question, hopefully.
Yeah, great. Let's move on because we're closing in on our time.
Okay, great. Well, we're right at the end, so that's perfect time. So, yeah. So, what's a key consideration here? I'd say transparency. I mentioned that before. Transparency is tremendously important. Be transparent up front, early and often. Talk about, meet often. Make sure you have a key professional advisor involved with you to mitigate your risk. I can tell you that so often I've had the buy side, like private equity, come in and tell us, like, we are relieved when we know that there's a professional advisor on the other side representing the seller, right? Because they know that they're going to be advising them on the key elements of a transaction. Increases your likelihood of success to closing your business. Excuse me. Flexibility, extremely important. You don't have to say I must do this or I must have that, right? Just stay open, right? We say that's important in selling your business and buying a business as well. So the preparation drives your valuation and your speed to close. So prepare early, right? If you're thinking about selling your business now, that's fine, right? But if you're thinking, selling your business years ahead, the time is now, right? Prepare now. That will drive your valuation later. Um, Market reality, understanding uh, the market and what shapes those outcomes, extremely important. Have your systems documented. Process discipline uh, benefits both sides, right? So have your systems and your procedures documented, extremely important. And then in your education, I mentioned that early on, that I had to go to the Barnes and Noble. The education there's tons of it out there. Be careful with AI. I think about 50% of it's right. So you got to read it and you got to understand it. Don't just completely rely on what's on AI about a business sale process. I think that wraps it up. You're on mute, but thank you for having me, Mary Jane. I appreciate it. I know this was a little bit quick, but if anybody wants to reach out to me to discuss the process a little bit more, whether it be buying or selling, I'm easily found. You can Google myself or Mary Jane, find us easily on the internet. But Transworld Business Advisors, it's a long thing here of Houston, South and West Texas, New Mexico, and Wyoming. We cover a big swath of area, but my contact information's on the screen here.
Thank you so much, Steve. We do actually have some questions. Um, what percentage of sellers are willing to finance the sell or include a seller's note as part of the structural deal?
Yeah, so back up 5 years ago, probably not very many, but nowadays it's pretty much in every transaction. So we that's part of an early conversation we have with sellers about being open to seller financing. You don't have to determine rates or term or anything like that right now, but most banks require that because they want the seller to have some skin in the game.
Gotcha.
It's a very
Uh,
high percentage.
Another question we had are how are ad backs evaluated by sellers? Is this a top issue for finalizing business valuations?
Yeah, so uh, on our front, it's very important. We're analyzing the ad backs and understanding whether or not they can really be considered in the valuation adjustment of the business. So extremely important. It's a part of almost every deal. Very few businesses do not have ad backs, but it's important to us to educate our clients, our sellers on what's a legitimate ad back and what's not.
Gotcha. Another question was what percentage of sellers are willing to stay on and see their business transition well and be successful?
Yeah, I don't really know the percentage. That's again that one where I would say if you're open to staying on, we call that kind of rolling equity where you're taking a second bite out of the apple down the road. I'd say there's fewer percentages that will do that. I would say that you're more likely to get more for your business if you're willing to do that. And your likelihood of success is probably much higher as well. Many of the private equity groups are looking for something like that, where you've got a seller looking to roll some equity, which means staying on. And most business owners are willing to stay on for an interim period of time, whether it be from 2 weeks to 2 months, to help ensure transition, at least be available on the telephone call to take a phone call about, hey, this, file is missing. Can you help me? This customer's giving me difficulty. Can you help me? Those type things.
Gotcha. I know that for my husband's company, it's a bit different. A lot of times companies like his, they keep them on for 2 years. before they, as part of the deal,
Yeah. Yeah. So
before
there'll
they
be a,
to
right, there'll be
leave.
like a consulting agreement of sorts to ensure continuity, business continuity. That's certainly normal. The larger transactions will have that. The smaller transactions are less likely to have the long-term consulting arrangement or employment arrangement.
And then the last question that's on here is, what type of commercial real estate businesses are SBA approved? So I can talk about that, and I'm sure you can as well. But you can get an SBA loan for most businesses. And I do actually have a CRE showcase specifically talking about SBA loans. So you can go check that out on my YouTube channel. But Steve, do you have anything you want to add to that?
Yeah, I think the rule around that is let's just say when you think about shopping center, is a shopping center. So a shopping center is a business, right? So you own the shopping center and you have tenants in it. And is that SBA eligible? Oftentimes it's not because the owner does not actually occupy that the premises, right? If you occupy, I think it's 51% or more of the
Yes.
premises, then you're SBA eligible. But most of these REITs and such that own those are not because they don't occupy.
That is correct. Yeah. SBA loans have to be owner occupied, at least 51%. You're correct.
Right.
Um, Thank you, everyone, for joining us. I'm Mary Jane Karimi. If you need commercial real estate help, please give me a call. And obviously, thank you to Steve for being our amazing speaker today. And if anybody needs help buying or selling a business, please reach out to Steve. His contact information is here. So thank you, everybody, and have a great day.
Thanks, Mary Jane.